to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 ways to stymie your opponent's scoring glory. I'm your host, Brian, and today with me are my co-hosts, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
And Davy.
Good to be back after a little bit of a vacay.
Yeah, you like to disappear for a whole month.
Yeah, I tried to draw a firm line in the sand here where like vacation was a vacation. And so it's like, you guys got to live without me. And in fact, you thrived without me. So I'm back to make sure that you don't miss me too much.
Oh, no, I respect it. I like to do the same when I can.
Yeah. It was good. Got some really quality time with the family. Was not totally without Underworlds. Was able to play some like vassal games with you guys, and then I'm trying to train my son up so that he's ready for best of 3. Get through his games and all that sort of thing, which is a topic for another time. But it's a different approach to the game that I enjoyed.
Nice,
cool. And for today's topic, we'll be covering Counterplay. So sort of an advanced topic for the state of the game and how to engage with what you have across the table from you. So
you talk about being kind of an advanced topic, and this is kind of highlighted for me. Like recently, as I, normally in the run up, I'm about to play in the next 3 weeks time. I'm going to play in 2 events that have the chance for a Worlds qualifying spot. Normally I might be like grinding out against the highest competition I could find, trying to really refine that play. But my son is going to play in both those, and realistically speaking, he's not going to take one of those spots, but I just want him to I want him to enjoy himself. And the bottom line is like, I want him to enjoy the game and for the other person to enjoy it. And so when I'm playing these games against him, like I'm having all these thoughts where like, hey, your best counterplay in this moment is this thing. I was like, oh, that's not where he's at right now. Like he's still figuring out the basics of like, how does his deck fit together? So that's all to say that like, we will do these episodes on a spectrum, right? Like Brian's been an awesome proponent for us of doing like our beginner series, to the extent that he's like forbidden me from making dumb puns for the for the episode titles.
Just want to make them easy to find.
Exactly. Which is a really good point, and one that burns my soul. But this, so today's topic is a little more advanced. But that doesn't mean if you are new that you shouldn't listen or anything like that. But some of those distinctions between like how deep this game can go has really been drawn into focus lately for me, with really kind of trying to teach my son to play at the higher level.
Well, the longer you withhold those higher level lessons from Emmett, the longer we are spared Madtown's prodigal son beating our butts and taking that spot in an event.
I think you guys are going to be safe as long as he continues to be like, I want to play Thundrix. And I'm like, I don't think they're very good right now. And it's like, don't care. We'll play. All right.
Dwarves with guns.
Yeah.
Now.
All right. Fine, bud. But yeah.
Eventually he's going to be on this rise, and he's going to be like so close to podiuming, and then he's going to hit puberty and be like, girls. And you're going to be like, I'm so disappointed in you.
Yeah, who knows? We'll see how it goes.
But before we get to today's topic, we got some community shout-outs. Phil, you want to take the Spent Glory?
Sure. So in light of our topic today, there's a couple articles over on the Spent Glory blog that cover the same type of topic. But these are 2 articles that are specific to Counterplay, sort of a how-to in Gnarlwood and Wyrdhollow specifically. And those articles are actually quite a bit more detailed than what we're going to do here today. They're a lot more narrow to just those seasons. So if you really want more information about this kind of a topic, if you really enjoy this and you're like, I need more, that's certainly one place you can go to find it.
Yeah, Fish does a great job here where he goes like deck by deck on like, here are the 3 objective cards that you are most likely to be able to stop or whatever, like 3 is just arbitrary number, but and then here's how you'd go about doing that. So it is as detailed as you could want. It's the usual extreme high quality from Spent Glory. I very much enjoyed both those reads. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, it's a very beginner-oriented box, so I think he did those articles, how to beat Wyrdhollow, how to beat Gnarlwood, so that when somebody starts out picking up the starter box, they can kind of get an idea how to counterplay their immediate deck partner.
I have one that I would like to shout out, and this is not a resource that is like super built out yet, but I had just never heard of it, and it feels like a rarity to find a Underworlds resource these days that I've not heard of. I've been involved in this community since the start, and this one is called Charge to Win, and we have a link as always to any of these community shoutouts in our show notes. And this is a list of all the war bands, and it does kind of a breakdown of like, here's what the fighters are. Here's they rate the stats on every, like, fighters, mobility, wounds. So you get the total wounds on the warband. If that changes on Inspire, they might have like a slash or whatever. Here's their average movement. Here's how many fighters they have. Here's their play style, like the default play style, faction, and what season. And it's stuff that, like, for us who have been like so fully engrossed in the game for such a long time, like maybe you're like, I kind of already know that stuff. But if you are coming to this, like, guys, there are like 58 warbands. If you are new to this game, this is actually a pretty helpful resource. And on some of these warbands, they have like somebody's given like a brief summary. And that's what kind of drew me to it, was somebody was pointing out their own summary of the warband that said, like, here's like a breakdown of how this warband plays, or what some strategy tips and all that sort of thing. So if this builds out to a more comprehensive thing, it has a lot of potential. It's pretty cool. So.
Yeah, it's neat. Even the new stuff has like coming soon for their stuff, so hopefully we'll see more. I was checking out the Skinnerkin, and cool site.
Yeah, I think the warband, if I'm remembering correctly, that I saw was a little more built out, was Skittershank. So if you want an example of what it could be, it's got like 3 bullet points about positioning, and then as you imagine with Skittershank, like 6 points about assassinating the enemy leader.
Yeah,
and and then several points with like one of their best pairings right now, which is Hungering Parasite. So
very nice.
Yeah. It's a fun way to convey the information. That's one of the cool things about the community, is there's so many different people trying to help spread the word and show how cool the game is.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
This is another way. More local to us is the day you're hearing this will be our Q3 World Qualifier Tournament going on. So check us out. We're going to try to stream the top table. So check out our YouTube channel at the Mortal Realms YouTube, as well as our website. Maybe we'll post up a link there or in our Discord. Cheer Phil and Davy on. Skylar and I will be running the event.
Cheer for the rest of our local.
Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And I secretly hope one of our locals takes it from you two.
I think they probably will. I got rocked this last time I showed up for League. Our local mad scientist Wellner, Exiled Dead. I just don't have enough reps. It's one of these things where, like, I know Exiled Dead is coming. I know that Pavent, who big shout out to him, just won the last Vassal League, last Vassal Nemesis League, with Cyrenized Razors and Rhineworm's Bite. Like, those are two matchups where I'm like, I don't know if I can go, 2 out of 3 against those, which is awesome. Like, you love to have that in your local group. Right there to run up against. So I'm with you. I'll be totally happy. We've put so much energy into like really trying to build up this local, and if we've got them to where they beat us, well then we've done our job right.
Yeah,
can't help but be proud of that.
Yeah.
Yep. Students become the masters.
Yeah. some of those students were not students for very long.
No, not
Well,
at
the
all.
masters are still the masters here because this topic is definitely going to be your two's wheelhouse. I felt dumb when I was like, can we make a whole episode on counterplay? And so here I am along for the ride, and I'm going to learn me some.
Yeah. I counterplay is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because it is it's something that you're going to do. Like it plays into any warband, anything that you are playing as, but it is especially heightened in control play, which I'm not saying I'm like great at, but it is definitely the play style that very much appeals to me. Like when it pops off for me, man, it feels real good.
Let me provide some anecdotal evidence. At Adepticon, you and I started playing. I made mistakes, but you were just reading me like a book and preventing scoring. I was like, how does he know what's in my hand? I had one glory to his like 15 in like round 1 or round 2. And I was just like, I got to concede this and go on to game 2 and 3. And then game 2, he locked me out completely. So I conceded the first game. My 1 glory goes to 0. He goes to 20. And then game 2, he just completely shut me down because he had already been seeing cards in my hand or cards as I was playing them. And I was just like, and now I couldn't get anything. And it was 0 to 20 legit. I didn't concede the second game. I was like, what happened?
I will say in your defense, I kind of had like double God hand on that. Like I was just like the cards were flowing perfectly. And then, sometimes you just see the matrix and it works. But what we're talking about here is like ways to kind of help you make that happen, hopefully.
Yeah.
Sharing wisdom.
Yeah.
All right. So personal observations. You guys see a lot. I've certainly countered myself in recent times. I have also witnessed myself counterplay myself by not recognizing what can potentially happen. So, for instance, I was playing as I was getting some practice games in, trying to show some people what other decks are out there, and I was playing as Domitan's Breakneck Slaughter against Void Cursed Hexbane, and I put an upgrade on. I guess this is just an anecdotal example,
Sure.
but I had put an upgrade on that made one of my staff attacks, or normally a range 2 attack, go up to 3. And then,
Oh,
lo and
no.
behold,
Yep.
guess what? The Void
Yeah.
Curse fighter's like, ooh, there's an opportunity there. And Void curses that fighter. I now cannot make a range 3 attack because each of my attack profiles are range 3.
Uh-oh.
And that fighter is incapable of charging, incapable of attacking, a total dud.
Just a glory pinata then.
Yeah.
Yes.
just go hide somewhere. Cast Gambit spells.
Yeah. That was not proud moment for me. I should have just considered that card dead in my hand because I should have seen the potential.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of like the types of things that as a player you're looking to exploit. So if your opponent does something like that, then you're wanting to take advantage. I guess Void Curse Thralls is as good a place to start as any. It's not immediately relevant to the newest decks, which we are seeing tons of, but it's been used a lot. And I kind of like that it kind of plays both sides where there's counterplay against it, but it's also one of the, I think, highest counterplay like availability decks because it can just do some interesting things to try and turn off some of your opponent's stuff.
Yeah. And I think before we get too deep here, I would just mention that like, this is such a broad topic. There's no way we can cover everything. What we're going to do is like cover the things that we think are most relevant right now, as long as we got time to talk. Like the clock's going to run out before we hit every Rivals deck or warband that has something we could say about it. This is going to be as freewheeling a conversation as we get on this podcast, and so in that way, it might be feeling a little less structured than some of our other topics, but with that said, like Phil, you know anything about Void Curse Thralls?
Well, I do now. I didn't used to.
I do too now.
So I didn't used to play it. I think you've probably still played the deck more than I have, but I've been
Yeah, I played a ton with Drom. Really enjoyed that pairing, and for a while there, it was like any new warband came out, I was like, "What should I pair it with?" Void Curse Thralls is the
Yep.
answer,
Yep.
So
Which we referenced in our last episode talking about the meta and pairings and how like Void Curse used to be sort of that de facto, it kind of works with everything deck, which I think has been usurped. But the point being that it is a very flexible deck. It has a lot of different tools available to it, but I think that it can be a very controlling deck. And so it, like you said, for Drom, it's a really nice pairing, but it can work out for a whole bunch of different reasons. For folks who don't know, Void Curse Thrall's main gimmick is that it has this idea of being able to put a counter on fighters to make them void cursed, which means that they have one block for their defense characteristic, and then they can't be driven back, and they can't take actions except for your standard actions, and they can't make any range 3+ attack actions. So in that way, Void Curse Thralls can immediately be a control deck against any ranged warbands, right? If you can find a way to Void Curse your opponent's ranged fighters, you kind of just turn off at least part of their card, if not their entire card. Rip Bobby's Hexbane. I had a situation where I was playing against Hexbanes with our local Bobby, and he kind of forgot that there is a card in Void Curse that lets you put a Void Curse counter onto a fighter who is holding or standing on an objective or a Snare Hex, which is a piece of that card I can never remember.
yeah,
That's a thing.
it's right there in the title, Reshaping Snare.
Yeah, it really is. So you'd think about it. But anyway.
Today I learned.
So when Hexbane isn't inspired, he only has the one range 3 attack action. So he just waltzed him onto the objective. I played the card and basically turned him off. And then that kind of ruins that whole entire game, because without Hexbane, you're down quite a lot.
Yeah, and so when we talk about, like, we think about the structure of this, where we say, like, hey, if you're up against Void Curse, like, what things are you going to try and do to, like, counter that deck? And that could just be like, hey, I'm going to try and stop them from scoring objectives, but it can also be like, how do I, like, stop them from getting the most out of what they can do?
Yeah.
And here's this is a great example where, like, Bobby got burned by this. I was watching the aftermath of the game, and it's like, I was already aware of this, but, like, wow, that is brutal. You and I played a very similar matchup later as, like, a practice game, and I put an extremely high priority on, one, not putting any of my ranged fighters on objectives, and two, getting Haskell inspired as soon as possible so that he would not end up in that I guess I'm just doing nothing situation. And that exact, like, Karnskier ended up, like, flying over him, throwing him onto an objective so that you could Void Curse him. But then I had a flaming torch that I think I made more attacks with the flaming torch in that game than I'd made in every other game, before that.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah. And that was me, like, trying to put the brakes on not only your scoring, because there's this Surrendered Will is a surge, which you can almost guarantee is included in any Void Cursed pairing.
Yeah.
So even if, when we talk about this counterplay, it isn't just like deny forever a particular score, but, like, in this game I'm talking about, I don't know how long you had Surrendered Will in your hand, but if I make you carry a surge from round 1 into round 2, that is like one slot of your 3 that's just not scoring.
Yeah.
And I can slow you down enough where maybe you don't see your whole objective deck, and maybe that's enough to slow your scoring where I can cap out over the top of you.
Absolutely. And specific to trying to stop Void Curse Thralls, I think there's something it's a little hard in best of 1, but in best of 3 games, you're kind of having to get a sense for how much is my opponent caring about Void Cursing all the fighters, because they have an objective. I'm not going to remember.
Reshape Realm. Yep.
Yeah. There's just for 4 glory in the end phase if every fighter that's alive is void cursed. And you kind of have to know, am I working my way around that card or not? Because it makes a huge difference if, you know, your opponent seems to really care about everyone who's alive being void cursed.
Yeah.
Because if they do, you probably have to work really hard to make sure at least one of your fighters doesn't get void cursed, because if you let them score that, it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah.
Potentially just checking somebody in the back corner so that they have to like really try hard to reach them.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, I can tell a counterplay story on this where back at LVO, I got to play Aaron, amazing player, really good. I think if we played again, he's probably got it. But I had the advantage of overhearing in like a previous game. I was almost certain that he had scored Reshape Realm on somebody, and so we were both playing. Drums, Gore Chosen. We both had Void Cursed. Like, it was a true mirror, and I was like, I am not including Reshaped Realm. He is. I have to really play. Like, I cannot afford. This is going to be such a tight scoring game. I cannot afford to give up 4 glory. So I will play as passive as I can possibly. You know, I will put every effort I can into making sure that Reshape Realm does not score, because not only does that protect the 4 glory, but if he's drawn it, that, like I talked about, that is a card in his hand that is not scoring for him, and he's got to decide, like, okay, am I going to carry this? Is it worth me carrying? Am I going to keep blocking this out? And I think that was in at least one of our games the difference between like a win or not. And I think if you're playing into Void Curse Thralls, until you see otherwise, you have to presume that this is a card being played.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think either until you see it or until you start to get a sense that they don't seem to care about void cursing your fighters, that you can kind of start to put some pieces together. But it's so hard to know. Especially if the pairing is more aggro. Because in that case, they don't necessarily even need to void curse all your fighters. They can just kill your fighters and void curse their own fighters. So you do have to be careful. I think another piece of playing against that aspect of void curse, and I think this is something we'll definitely mention for other decks and other situations, is like, you are going to have to know, how passive can I play against this, because I'm worried about the void curse delivery system, if you will. The most of the ways to void curse enemy fighters require that you be close to enemy fighters in some way. And so if you know that and you feel like you have that advantage, similar to what Brian was mentioning earlier and what you mentioned in that Drom matchup, is like, how much can I play off and still score? Am I going to run the risk of like not scoring enough to win because I tried to stop there's a break point with control play, right? Where like, you can deny your opponent glory, but if you've somehow played yourself by denying your opponent, like trying to deny your opponent, then it was all for naught, right? So it's, you sort of have to then ask yourself that question of, can I be like longboard in this situation? Does that help me? Can I like just try and keep them at arm's length long enough that it's going to stymie some of their game plan? And I think those are actually questions that it's less about, what am I playing against, and more about what am I playing and how can I then use that against this deck to know like what are the available avenues for me? Because not every warband and deck pairing can use every strategy to counterplay, if that makes sense.
Well, I think a great example is, let's say, into void cursed. All right, like we talked about protecting your own fighters from being void cursed. The ways that's going to happen is if they have, I forget, it's the upgrade where after an attack you void cursed whoever you hit. There's a void cursed assault, which if it succeeds, but that's a range 1 attack. There is where if a fighter dies, everyone adjacent becomes void cursed, reshaping demise.
Yeah.
There's one that we see less often, which is just every within 2. There's a 33% they get void cursed. That's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And there's reshaping snare, which is if you're on an objective or snare. So let's say, for example, you are playing Sepulchral Guard, right? You're not going to shut down your whole objective. Like that whole plan is too hard. Like if you say like, oh, I'm going to deny surrendered will by never being on objective. Well, to your point, Phil, like, yeah, you've denied a 1 glory surge, but in the process, you've like tanked half your objective deck. Like you've taken out. So you have to make that calculation. And in this case, like, that's fine. If you want to make one of my skeletons have 1 block, can't be driven back, sounds actually kind of amazing. I'll take that and I'll resurrect, and that'll be fine. So you got to make that calculation and then decide, who loses more on this counterplay. I think that's what you're getting at there.
Absolutely. That is a perfect example of like, can I afford to, give up some of my scoring to deny my opponents? And sometimes that answer is a very definite no, and you have to know when that is, because it can lose you games. I think the other aspect of Void Curse Thralls that is this is harder, I think, to counterplay against, but it is very much a movement focused deck.
Yeah. I'll let me tell you, in my own notes, I put like, because what is it, refashion priorities and refashion reactions.
Those are the 2 upgrades. Yep.
I put those, and they have like a gambit for moving as well. I put those 2, and then I just put a question mark next to it.
So. Yeah, right. It's like, so how do you counterplay these?
Adjacency.
That is the actual way for the upgrades. So both the refashioned upgrades, you can't take the reaction if the person who triggered the reaction is adjacent to you. And so if you see a scenario where you're worried about your opponent getting a free move with a certain fighter, you may have to look at your, target options and say to yourself, can I afford to attack the person I really want to, or do I need to move a fighter adjacent to the person with this upgrade to stop them from moving? There's too many things that move can do for you for us to really elucidate here as to why it would be bad to give them that move, because like every single warband would have different reasons for wanting to do it, but a free out of sequence move can often change a game. And so I think when you're presented with that situation and you see that like, oh, your opponent could make that extra move, or I could maybe take a suboptimal play, but stop that move. It may be that is what you really have to do, because your opponent might be banking on getting that extra activation out of sequence.
Yeah, maybe you move adjacent to the fighter with the upgrade and still attack the fighter you want to attack if you have range. But by moving adjacent to the fighter with the upgrade, you at least shut down the move, and you're just giving up the supports on their defensive dice.
Yeah. That is at least one potential situation. It, like I said, there's so many different things that can go wrong there, but I think you really have to start thinking about it. And I think one of those things that can become difficult with those upgrades is sometimes you kind of forget what upgrades your opponent has on their fighters. And I think in the situation with Void Curse, it can be, I think, a pretty fair thing to ask, to be like, hey, could you actually like set that card like next to your fighter card so that information is a little, because like oftentimes, at least for me and a lot of the people I play against, you just kind of tuck the upgrades under the fighter cards. So it's like you can see the name, but without the art or anything showing. And I think in those situations, it's so important to know which fighters have those, and it's not always clear, that I think just asking your opponent to do that for you, because it is open information. There's no, like, you're not allowed to hide that. So it's a simple thing that you don't always think of, but like you can totally just ask your opponent to do that, and it just makes it a little quicker to look over at their warband and be like, oh, that's the fighter that I have to worry about.
That makes sense. Brian, I think we've covered Void Curse. What would you like us to cover next here as the
Let's jump to something more recent. And how do you actually deal with the Bane of Heroes from Hungering Parasite?
Sure.
Because I don't think against Void Curse there's really much emphasis on killing the Void Curse fighter necessarily, like as a game piece. Do you think?
Yeah.
Maybe if you think Surrendered will, but I think a lot of the timing is just to the Void Curse benefit, that it doesn't really behoove you to make the Void Cursed fighter a massive target.
Yeah, there's some like really low payoff stuff where if you think they're going to score Unwitting Guardians or Unceasing Imperatives or something like that, like, but that's like energy spent to like deny a one glory end phase. But
right.
I think you've covered. I think that's a really relevant question into Hungering Parasite. And the trick with Hungering Parasite here, though, is that like if you kill that parasite infected fighter, that parasite is coming back in the next. Am I remembering right? The Inspire step?
Yeah, it comes back so quick that it's like I don't know how much value there is to targeting the Bane fighter. So then we got to try and counter it some other way, right?
Well, yeah, and I think it's all about timing. I think if you can find a way to kill that Bane in the infected fighter towards the end of the round or at the very end of the round,
right,
you really limit what they're able to do. So, like, if they've only got one fighter on an objective, well, then killing that fighter and then they have to hand it off to somebody else. Well, then you've denied Far and Wide, which is the Bane of Heroes is holding an objective. Yeah. Even more so if they're holding in your territory. There's other things like, maybe like you just have to recognize like where the points are coming from. If they've tipped their hand too early and they've got a bunch of upgrades on one fighter, then you could deny Cursed Tyrant.
Yeah, I
think the ideal if you're on against Hungering Parasite is to get them to kill themselves. Because if and this is like, it's not quite like magical fantasy dreamland or whatever, but because I've done it a few times, but if you can get that fighter down to 1 health left and they don't have the I don't take damage from the parasite and I'm no longer adjacent to somebody, then they kill themselves at the very end of the round. If you do that right at the end, there is not another Inspire step to hand out, and then there isn't even a parasite on the board to score whatever it is that they might want to score. That is the dream. It is pretty hard to achieve, but to do that, it's all about kind of timing when you're going to kill that, when you're going to lay that damage out. It's about saving the pushes, like maybe they're like going to avoid it by being adjacent. So I think. In general, I kind of advocate for holding a push pretty late into the round because that gives you a chance to deny end phases and not just surges. And in this case, it gives you a chance to like shove them away. And it's a 2 damage swing. Instead of them pinging you with the parasite, they take the ping instead.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it is... So I guess a couple things. First, for folks who maybe don't know what the Bane of Heroes does exactly, it is an upgrade that the player with the Hungering Parasite will always have to put on one of their fighters unless they've applied it to an enemy fighter. It staggers the fighter that is equipped to it and staggers any adjacent fighters to the fighter who has it equipped. And at the end of the round, before scoring... that it has to deal 1 damage to the fighter who's equipped or any adjacent fighters. So as Davey was mentioning, you don't really want to be next to the fighter with the parasite at the end of the round, so trying to push away. I think that stagger piece of it, though, is another aspect of like how do you play around this. It gives you some baked in accuracy if you are wanting at a specific time to be able to take out the fighter who's holding the parasite. because you're going to have a free reroll on them. And so if you're like, I'm hoping that I can either land an attack late to drive them off this objective, or I can land this attack late to kill the fighter before they'll really have a good chance to reposition with the Hungering Parasite, you can kind of stack the fact that you're going to have a reroll with any other accuracy boosts that you have to like kind of go all in to try and shut down the Hungering Parasite player's plans. It's a little easier said than done, but obviously it is something to keep in mind that you are going to have that extra accuracy.
Yeah. Now, what if I just get rid of the Bane entirely?
That'd be pretty great.
It would be. There's only a couple ways to like really do this, and even these are sort of pending an FAQ on exactly how this interaction works. But Ryan Black Relics carries a frozen solid gambit, which will basically flip an upgrade of your choice upside down on a 2/3 chance, a channel or better. So if you can flip that and then kill that fighter, theoretically that's not a that is not the Bane of Heroes anymore, and that fighter dies, and then it just does not come back unless they have some sort of resurrect mechanic, and that is pretty wild. Like you then have bricked a ton of the deck. The other deck that jumps to mind there is
now you'd have to be careful also with the timing, because you're going to want to get that like fighter vulnerable and then freeze the card, and it'll be frozen for 3 activations. So you're going to have if you got to do the timing right, because if you got to play it going into your activation, because then it would be frozen for 2 of your activations. And so either you got to have like a power card to ensure the kill, like with a ping, or you got to be able to kill that fighter within those 2 activations before it thaws. And then it would essentially be it would be frozen, and it would be turned face down, so the Bane of Heroes wouldn't activate as normal.
Right. Even better, if you are one particular warband, is to hand them a cool shiny sword and say, here's the perfect blade. Guess what? You're not infected anymore. And for me, I've definitely done this. Like, here's a really cool sword. Like, oh, right, you're not staggered anymore because you don't have it. And then like, whoops, I missed. And like, oh, now you have a 3 smash, 3 damage attack. There are ways for this to backfire. But you can make some progress on this too.
Yeah. Does that turn off the scoring? Like to say they're not holding?
Yeah, they count as having no other upgrades. So all they have is perfect blade. I thought I had Skylar. He had wiped me out with a Hungering Parasite deck, and I was like, well, here, have the perfect blade right at the end. And then he had a card that could break an upgrade. And so he broke it.
That jerk.
Yeah. But it was a cool like counterplay thing going on.
Sorry, you mentioned that you'd have to kill the fighter too, because they could just take an activation to resist it and break the blade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not very effective, but one of my pairings that I enjoyed the most was Void Cursed, Thricefold Discord.
Yeah.
And there, if you manage to Void Curse the fighter and give them the perfect blade, they're not allowed to take an action that is not an attack at range 1 or 2, or a charge or whatever. And so all of a sudden they're like, I'm not allowed to resist this gift. So I guess I just have this perfect blade for the rest of my life.
It is still perfect though.
Yeah. Here's some corner case stuff into. Well, I guess not even corner case. In Hungering Parasite, what I found more and more important is until you've seen Malefic Siphon, and this is the gambit that says heal the Bane of Heroes holder 1 and damage somebody within 3/1. That's an incredible card. Like it's a range 3 ping and a heal all baked into the same card. Really brutal. This is worth playing around, and for that reason, like I've often tried to kill the person with the Bane of Heroes by either one-shotting them or one-shotting them and following up with a ping. Like, hey, I'm gonna hit you and throw you into a lethal, or hit you and ping you with a card, so that you do not have the opportunity to use this Malefic Siphon to heal yourself and hurt me back. So I think that's something that really needs to be in the forefront of your mind when you're playing against Hungering Parasite.
It's a very important card for the deck. I think another card that is very important to keep in mind when you're playing against Hungering Parasite is sudden swap. This one allows them to swap the places of any other fighter in the warband and the fighter who is holding the Bane of Heroes upgrade. For some reason, it has no range restriction, which is wild. So you can have some really surprising attacks suddenly when the charged out fighter that they bombed into your territory gets swapped with their really scary Hungering Parasite fighter or something to that effect. So if they seem to have a fighter who's like way out of position and you're like, that doesn't make any sense, they probably have sudden swap and they're probably going to use it, and it's probably going to ruin your day.
Yeah, if Batsquig moved to a really suspicious spot in the middle of your warband, think about killing Batsquig.
Mala, either that or just getting away from Batsquig. Like if that's even a possibility, just be like,
kill or run. Yep.
Yeah, just don't hang around for this teleport in to come and bop you. Or I mean, not that I've seen it used this way too much, but it could also be used to make very dangerous charges with the Hungering Parasite fighter, and then they just teleport them away to safety and give you some just random fighter that you don't really care about as much.
Yeah. Here's the lag squig.
Yeah.
Have fun.
It's like, thanks. Just before we get too far past it, I was thinking there's one other way that you can actually take away the Hungering Parasite forever, which is a little weird. But if you're playing with Malevolent Masks, and you've been given the Bane of Heroes onto one of your fighters, which this is sort of like if you're playing Hungering Parasite, don't do this to your Malevolent Masks opponent. But they have one card. I cannot remember the name of it. I know the art though. But it lets them basically discard an upgrade to then be able to take one back from a fighter who's got one placed, either dead or alive. Just get one of your upgrades back from somebody who's already had it placed. And so in this case,
is it revealed aspect?
It is revealed aspect.
Okay, and so they can pick up your Hungering Parasite, and then it's just kind of out of the game for the rest because they're not going to play it.
No, why would you?
And then it's just in their hand, and once it's in their hand, there's no rules to say that it comes back automatically because that
you got to give a real dirty look when they discard it and in between rounds.
Yeah. So that is the one other way that you can like completely shut it down if you're playing Malevolent Masks and they oblige by handing you the parasite, which they shouldn't, but if they do, punish them.
Yeah, I think in general it's like originally there was some back and forth on whether or not you want the Bane or if you want to give it to your opponent. I think there's a lot more ways that if the Bane gets on one of your fighters, you can disrupt their game plan a lot worse than
agreed
if they keep it on theirs.
Yeah. I think I have, from looking through both the objectives and just the scenarios in which you'd want to give it to an opponent's fighter, there's so few reasons to want to that I think it's generally not a great idea because it takes a lot of the agency away from you. Which opens up a whole bunch of more options for your opponent to counterplay.
So if the Bane lands on one of your fighters, is it you might be giving up a little bit of glory with what is it, Far and Wide, where the Bane hero is the only one in enemy territory?
Far and Wide is holding objective one in your territory too if it's an enemy. I think it's Bane's Triumph or something like that.
Yeah, but it's the only fighter in enemy territory is the infected fighter.
But if you take the Bane fighter, if they like pass it to one of your guys, and then you just turn around and run them back to a corner, I think aside from Bane's Triumph, that will shut down quite a bit of what they want to do objective card wise.
And I think even Bane's Triumph has to be a friendly fighter, so
you can't score it off of an opposing fighter. There's there's really only like two cards that care about it being on an opposing fighter, and they're both not actually that good. It's like your problem now, which is a really hard 2 glory end phase, and there's a surge, I think, but
there's one for it being on an enemy leader, isn't there?
Yep, that's powerful pawn.
Yeah.
Where it's either got to be your leader and your leader's in enemy territory, or an enemy leader.
Yeah, both probably not what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen powerful pawn be handy, and it is worth, like, people will include it. You just gotta, like, like, hey,
Yeah.
it's on the person who took Hungering Parasite has only the leader in my territory. Like, okay, I need to either push him out
Yeah.
or smoke him.
Yep.
The one corner case thing I wanted to say before we left here is, like, you will occasionally see, not occasionally, you will often see Wicked Aim get thrown out onto, and this is something that increases the range of the fighter with Bane of Heroes. Often, so if they have the Bane of Heroes, they're all the way out to range 3. There is some counterplay there. If you are running Void Cursed, if you can Void Curse that fighter, you can do, I don't know, we call it the Brian Coven, where all of a sudden you have a fighter that cannot make attacks, and, like, that's a big deal. That bricks a number of things, and you can just, like, okay, I don't have to worry about that dude for a little while. They likely have a whole bunch of things. Maybe don't ignore them entirely, because they might still be scoring a whole bunch of stuff, but, like,
You're right.
Yeah, it reduces your bleed. There are, obviously there's all that's pretty corner case, because you need to be Void Cursed. There's a couple of things, like Thrice Fold can mess that up with the Helmet of Insight or whatever. But
yeah. I think if you are listening to this and you're saying to yourself, man, countering Hungering Parasite has felt really hard, and I don't feel like I've been able to do any of these things. Well, that would be because, dear listener, you are correct. It is very hard. So, like, these are our best tips that we've found, but it is not in any way like a foolproof thing to counter Hungering Parasite. So just if you're having difficulty feeling like you can counter their plays, it's not like a skill problem. It is just a very hard thing to counter.
Some narrow windows of opportunity to look out for. For my experience in recent memory, Rime-Locked Relics has been the deck that I've been running, and that is a deck that relies on thawing upgrades out onto fighters and holding objectives in no one's or enemy territory. So a key here is that the upgrades will spend some time thawing. They take 3 activations. And one way, I haven't seen much of this done, but if you're able to intercept that Rime-Locked Relic before it thaws, you can prevent some surge scoring. And if they don't have another Rime-Locked Relic in hand, that could be one way to absolutely cripple a hand. Just keeping a surge card from scoring feels so bad. Particularly the surge is defrosted, requiring that a Rime-Locked Relic thaw while the fighter's on an objective. So if you see these things telegraphed, go gunning for that guy. Obviously, they should try and make them safe. So it's likely going to be landing on the person in the back. But if you see that mistake coming out and it's a thing you can target, go for the throat there on that and take that guy with that relic down.
You do have to be a little bit careful, though. There is a particular score in the deck that cares about having a fighter with a face down relic.
Steaming corpses.
Yep. So if you suspect or know that your opponent's running steaming corpses, you actually are going to probably want to be a little bit selective about if you take that particular counter path, because you might just be giving them a 2 glory end phase.
And that's kind of a best of 3 read if they are putting that out on a vulnerable fighter. Like if they're chucking this upgrade out on a vulnerable fighter up in your territory, that might be signaling to use steaming corpses. And you can play it that way. It might be defrosted. It's likely defrosted is in their deck. But if they're making the obvious upgrade out on a vulnerable fighter, that should tell you that they have steaming corpses.
And my take on facing Rime-Locked Relics is that messing with whoever's got the Rime-Locked Relic, which is about to thaw, like that is a pretty tough ask. A lot of times, if your opponent really wants to score, they're putting on the most protected fire, the one furthest at the back.
Yep.
Pretty tough to get to. Maybe you got great mobility and you can do it. Awesome. Congratulations. But for me, I think a lot of the counterplay actually happens before the game even starts when we're on objective placement, because they have icy grip where they want to hold an objective in their. They want to hold two, one of which is in enemy or no one's territory, or icebound defenders where they want to hold two and all in one territory. So if they can have the only one that's in no one's, or have two and they only have two in their territory. Or even we're talking about wintry conquest where it's they're going to have to hold three. So setting these to either make any of those objectives harder or to make it where you know exactly where they're going to be. Like if they're going to score icebound defenders, it means they absolutely have to hold this objective, which is in a very vulnerable spot where I can throw a whole bunch of attacks in at them. And so I think setting that up, using that to dictate where they're going to have to be, knowing that in advance and being able to really capitalize on that is one of the biggest counterplays on Rhymelock Relics. And it gets you the best mileage for denying the biggest glory that they can score.
Yeah. And I think that actually just applies to playing against pretty much any hold strategy. Sort of before the game begins is where you have your best opportunity to give yourself some advantages. Because like Davey was saying, you can kind of know where your opponent needs their fighters to be ahead of time. And if you do, then you can kind of work the game plan around those specific spots.
Brian, you running Gits, is it Gits everywhere? What's the one that's
Gits everywhere.
Okay.
So two for all in mine, two for all in your territory, and one glory for holding all in no one's.
Yeah. So if you're setting that up, your ideal is what? If you got to fully dictate where all five were going to be, how are you setting those up?
If I got to dictate, it'd be one or two in my territory, one in no one's, and then the rest in enemy territory. But that's more for Gets. With Rhymelocked, I always put my first one either in no one's or just across the line in enemy territory if I have all of a full board flush. Widthwise, because then I got more options for putting my second one in no one's territory. But I'll put one in no one's territory to secure that, and then I put one just across the line in enemy territory so that I have the majority of my function with the Rhymelocked Relics. So the worst thing you can do to me if you're placing an objective before me is to place it in the center, just across the line in my territory, because that will get that 2 hex buffer out away. And the more narrow that no man's land is, the less options I have. So
Yep,
thanks.
Absolutely.
That just made my Gits life harder.
Yeah. And I think just in passing, we can say that a lot of these same deployment lessons are the same things you would want to use against Fearsome Fortress as well.
Yes.
They have this similar kind of stuff of needing to be in the middle of the board. And so you can kind of try and block their objective placements and make things difficult for them. So
yeah, that one you just want to avoid what we call a fortress territory, which is no man's land plus a hex on each side. So you put your objective tokens outside of that fortress territory, and it just limits their scoring potential. They have to work harder to move feature tokens into fortress territory to potentially score more stuff. So
yeah. And I think once we talk about after placement, playing into Fearsome Fortress or Rhyme Locked, we're counterplay includes just standing on those spots that the opponent wants to stand on. So if you are in a situation where they need to hold more because they're trying to score, I'm gonna forget. It's a cold front, I want to say.
Yeah, hold more.
Well,
it's cold
then
front.
I'm going to step on 1. Now they got to step on 2. I'm going to step on 2. Well, now they got to have all the other 3. It just makes that. So if if you don't have to give up too much of your own scoring, that goes back to, like we talked about, like making that calculation of how much is it worth me scuppering my own plan to make this. But if it's minimal cost to you, well, go stand on that thing. If you can make an attack from there that does something that you want to have happen, then do that, and you just make their plan that much harder. And all of a sudden, even though you're not scoring off of standing on objectives or feature tokens, if you're playing against Fearsome Fortress, then you're getting mileage in the matchup by occupying those spaces, because then they have to either push you off or kill you to get those spots from you.
Absolutely. Lots of ways to counterplay hold, which is a little unfortunate because I feel like hold needs some help right now, but
give me more push.
We'd never be sad to hear
it. Speaking of places to stand and where to stand, where not to stand, what about Rhymeworm's Bite?
Yeah, so this is another big one that starts in setup. Rhymeworm's Bite, like honestly, the big one is puncturing ice shards, and that is one that is like powerful enough, especially if they're the recurrence, like reemergence, where they pick it up and play it again. You do not want to be standing next to hazard hexes, and hazard hexes in this case are cover, snares, or lethals. They're going to find ways to make that happen anyway. They'll have Earth-Shattering Tread. They'll have different cards that can like try to make it happen. You have to make them work for that instead, so that it's just not like a freebie right out of the gate. Yeah. So picking a board that doesn't have any of those things, maybe it has blocked, fine. That doesn't count. But not having those, and then like make that calculation. Do I care about objectives? If I don't, then I'm going to put them in enemy territory, because the second half of that card says that somebody, it has to be next to a hazard hex or a feature token. So what you don't want to be is you are the only person who's next to any feature tokens or hazard hexes. And that's like step one in trying to play against Rhymeworm's Bite.
And so one of the best ways to do that is to start off by placing a board with no feature tokens. If you can kind of guess that your opponent is bringing Rhymeworm's Bite, or they're playing a warband that is, because it doesn't have a block card. If they're playing a warband where you're like, there's a pretty good chance that they might have Rhymeworm's Bite. Have a board that doesn't feels good for what you want to do normally. Hopefully you don't need feature tokens for your game plan. But if you go
feature tokens, you're talking hazard hexes. Feature tokens being like what we placed.
Hazard hexes on features on the board, but yes, hazard hexes on your board. Choosing a board that's barren of that. Blocked hexes don't count as hazard hexes, so you can still get away with blocked hexes. But placing that board, that way you just rob the Rhymeworm's Bite player. I would even recommend not using blocked hexes, because they can create bottlenecks, and there's other cards in Rhymeworm's Bite, such as Deadly Wards, which can turn starting hexes into lethals. And so if you might have to bottleneck around blocked hexes, you might have to pass through one of those lethals. Playing one match, I longboarded my opponent, and there were two adjacent starting hexes next to a snare hex, and I played Deadly Wards in turn one of a longboard where he's going to have to march across, and it was a wall of 3 lethals right in front of him.
It's pretty rude. I think it's good that you mentioned the longboard there, because something that I feel like I frequently see playing against Rhymeworms is that the warbands playing Rhymeworms want to be a little more standoffish, and so oftentimes they are going to either be doing like a full offset, or they're going to go full longboard, and they're going to try and make you sort of move to them while dodging all of whatever nasty lethal stuff they're going to be throwing at you. And so I say that in that, and this is something I often don't get to until I'm like pretty well repped with a warband and have a pretty strong game plan, but like starting to just look through all the different board options and figuring out, if I have to play in these long board situations, if I have to play in these full offset situations, which board can I pick that will still allow me to do my game plan effectively? Because there will be certain situations where maybe you grab a board because it doesn't have any hazard hexes because you're like, I just need to be safe. And then you realize that like, oh no, I can't like get into the positions I need to now because all of my starting hexes are so far from where I need to be. And that they get you anyway. So that is sort of the other piece of the like sort of pre-game plan, is that you also need to know like what boards can I play against this beyond just thinking about their power cards and the lethal hexes and snare hexes and that sort of thing, but also just like, where could I even deploy my fighters so that I can actually do something in this matchup?
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about like before the game starts, like here's what you need to do against Rhineworm's Bite. I think once you're in it, just being aware of a couple there, like one of the things with Rhineworm's Bite is that like there is a lot of extra damage in the power deck. But the objectives can be kind of clunky, and especially clunky if you know how to work against them. And I'm thinking specifically here a couple like corralled like sheep, which is if your opponent is running Rhineworm's Bite, they're looking for all your fighters to be in the same territory. Well, make sure that you are cut across the two. So like if you're this, I got to rush them. Well, maybe rush two and leave one back if you're an elite warband, or leave one away. And same thing is spread out. They may be trying to score for nobody being adjacent to anybody else. So like keep one or more people next to each other, and just avoid giving them like just these casual scores that was like, hey, it didn't really matter where I was at. If it doesn't cost me anything, let's just keep some people next to each other. Like if I attack somebody, maybe I won't drive them back. We'll keep them next to each other and see what happens. So
Never Punished is another one that's frustrating when you like realize that you had an opportunity to deny it and you just missed it, because that one is asking that the opponent has more wounded fighters than they do, and so you should be able to sort of see like, I have 2 wounded fighters, they have 1. Maybe instead of continuing to try and kill that fighter, I actually should try and lay up another damage on somebody else just to deny that, because it's 2 glory end phase that if you don't work towards it can be hard. Obviously, if they have healing, then it's a little harder because they can just pull those wound tokens off, and then you don't really have those options as much. But that's another that you'll have to just sort of feel out, because certain matchups will make that more difficult. Zandara.
Yeah.
Also difficult that Rhineworm's Bite brings its own counter with not being able to be pinged by stuff. So mirror matches can be very interesting.
2 of them even.
Yeah. So I'm curious what you think about how can Breakneck Slaughter be countered.
Let me tell you what my first bullet point on this is. It is question mark.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I think the
Roll
old
creds for defense,
the old standby of Longboard and Prey.
Yeah,
right? I mean, when you're playing,
so this applies for Tooth and Claw as well.
When you're playing against aggro, and you know that their whole game plan revolves around making charges, making attacks, dealing damage, getting kills, the absolute best thing you can do is just limit the number of attacks they get to make in a round.
Yeah.
That is difficult when certain warbands are very fast.
Yeah.
But on a longboard situation, most warbands, even speed 5 warbands, are not getting to you beyond 1 or 2 fighters in round 1.
Yeah.
And that is a big deal. I mean, that is a potential loss of like 3 attacks. And then ideally, an aggro warband wants to make an attack with every activation. So they're losing almost a third of their action efficiency for the game. Like that by itself is pretty huge. But this gets back to our early point of like, you have to ask yourself that question: can I afford to do this? Like, how much can I score without engaging? If the answer is not very much, it's going to be rough. But if you even have like 5 or 6 glory, that might always or that I shouldn't say always. That might be enough.
Yeah.
I've certainly have situations where Davy's gotten me where he's just like, well, I'm going to score 5 glory and that'll be enough.
For me, I think there's 2 objectives that really shout out to me in Breakneck Slaughter as being counterable. One of those being eager for the fight, and this is every fighter in that warband has to have a charge counter, or has to be within 2 of the enemy. If there's anyone who is not charged, we'll make sure that that person is isolated from the fight. So you have the chance there to deny eager for the fight, which is 2 glory and phase. Pretty substantial.
Yep.
And the other one is fastest around, and this is like the more greedy Breakneck Slaughter decks where they want to have all their fighters in your territory and none of your fighters in their territory. So consider, if you've got the last activation, dive somebody back into their territory and deny that 3 glory end phase.
Yep.
And then they're going to have to decide, like, okay, will I turn around and come after that person, or will I just ditch this? So those are some, like, not edge cases, but like, if you have the bandwidth, then work on that.
Basically falls into the general category of, if you know your opponent's objective cards well enough, you can try and counter that. You're not necessarily countering the impetus and momentum mechanic in this deck.
Yeah.
And with a mechanic like move fast and hit hard, that's hard to counter.
Yeah.
I can see some more counterplay with Malevolent Masks, but you've got plenty of experience playing Malevolent Masks. Can you tell us all your squishy targets?
So Malevolent Mask is a weird one where, like, the biggest thing you can do against them is deny them their seed glory. So if you can afford to, if you know where their initial glory is going to come from, and you can slow that down, you can really slow this deck down, because this is a deck that, like, gets its high glory scores by getting the ball rolling. So if you get in there early and get entangled early, well, then they're more likely to get a kill, or whatever they're doing. And this is why the decks that do it really well do it so well. So we're talking about, like, Morn Flight, where it's like, that's fine. If you don't want to engage with me, I'm going to wander around, step on some objectives back here, and get the seed glory. So I think the big thing with masks is understanding where their seed glory is coming from, and if you have the opportunity to deny it. So, like, if there's even objective deep in your territory, and it's not even where they're doing it, like against Harrows or whatever, cover up the achievable even, or whatever the case may be. So,
yeah, I think a lot of the same counter, I mean, it sucks to have to just keep saying this, but, like, a lot of the same stuff for countering Rhyme Locked, a lot of the same stuff for covering Fearsome Fortress, it applies to masks as well. Masks usually has something of a hold plan. They have a couple great surges for holdings, evens and odds with a masked fighter, or I don't remember the secondary conditions, but they also revolve around holding. And then beyond that, it's a lot of positioning stuff where they're going to try and have their fighters with masks be in certain places on the board. And so it again becomes a situation of, like, keep track of where the fighters with those upgrades are, try and, like, block them out if you can. Like, if you can, like, make them have to work harder to get into your territory, well, then Hooded Stranger is going to be quite a bit more difficult to score for 2 glory. And, like, I don't know, it's often difficult, at least in the matches I've played, where, like, oh, just take out the fighters with masks. Well, usually the fighters with the masks are not the fighters who are in range of being killed right away. But if you can take out a fighter with a mask, that certainly can help. I think there's actually a situational awareness of, like, oh, that fighter's really low on wounds already, and they put a mask on them. Are they hoping I kill them so that they can then use the resurrection card that they have to get an extra activation out of that fighter? Because they get to put that fighter on any starting hex, right?
Starting hex in their territory, yeah.
Okay, in their territory. So it's a little more limited, but the point stands that, like, sometimes you'll actually have to be careful because they might be trying to, similar to like steaming corpses, they might be trying to set something up where they kind of want that fighter to die if they think they're already going to die anyway, sort of thing. So
yeah. To that effect, I think like as you approach the end game, some of their big scores come from Victoria's Veils, which is 3 of them have masks. That's worth 1 unless you get to the third end phase, in which case it's worth 3.
yeah,
And there's Completed Pact, which is more of them have masks than you have surviving fighters. So that's like a big swing. Where like, okay, do I make can I make a play that knocks out a mask bearer? That means I can afford to lose 1 more fighter. Or do I play it safer and make a play that makes it harder for them to kill that fighter that gets them? If you've got them down to 3 and there's no one to be resurrected with a mask or something like that, then you're like, okay, as long as I keep 3 fighters alive, they can't score a Completed Pact. Or,
yeah. I think this is
Do you
maybe
think that card is a common take?
I think it is in certain builds. I think you'll see Completed Pact in most of the Resurrection builds.
Yep.
I know like Wellner will run it in his Exiled Dead for sure, because obviously you just bring back people all the time.
Yeah, I think Rats can run it. I think that Spalko Guard could run it. Grimwatch. As we've mentioned in the past, Malevolent Masks gets a lot of mileage out of being able to resurrect masked fight.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a good point to just quick call out as a generic counterplay tip that I know Davy's pulled on me many a time, and I have often, with my forgetfulness towards end of games situations, sometimes the best thing to do is to look at the game state, say, I'm currently ahead, I am going to disengage. Especially if you're faster than your opponent. There's a lot of situations where, like, as we were just saying, if they need to have more of your fighters dead than they have masked fighters, well, if you just walk 5 hexes away from their warband, that might make it maybe difficult, maybe straight up impossible for them to attack another one of your fighters. And it sometimes feels like a weird play to just be like, and I'm going to walk away now. But sometimes that's the right thing to do, and it can counter people. I think this maybe goes back to the Breakneck Slaughter situation as well, and other aggro matchups where, like, if you feel like you have the passive scoring and you've managed to get a deployment situation where you're already fairly far away, the right play might be to take that fighter who's closest to your opponent's warband and walk them backwards. It does nothing for your game plan, but it just moves their initial target that much further away.
I mean, I can think specifically back to the game I took off of Captain Murder, Derek, at LVO. The one I won involved the retreat with my Gore Chosen, and it was denying him. I had 2 fighters left alive, and I was like, as long as I keep both these guys alive, I know he's got 2 end phases for 2 glory that need him to have 2 of my guys dead, and I back off, and both those are bricked. If I can get all the way back to where he cannot get those kills, but that involves like knowing like, hey, what's the worst case scenario? What is the most that they could score right now? And let me play against that. Yeah.
It's kind of like you're having to play some odds, right? Because you might just let them have sort of free reign to do what they needed to do to score more end phase. But especially in aggro matchups, I think you can tend to know that, like, they haven't been holding, or they haven't been doing weird, like, just stand around in certain positions stuff all game. They probably want to kill me. And if I try and stop that, it's probably better than me chasing this last surge that's in my hand that requires me to attack one more time. Well, I don't know if you had any other decks you wanted to talk about, Brian, but I think those are all the ones that I feel like I'm seeing frequently in the meta right now.
Yeah, definitely feels like the majority of counterplay still revolves around turn 0. So practicing that turn 0 and setting up and being able to set up tokens, it's slightly different for some of these decks, but it's turn 0 is still a critical point in the game. But I do think that, like, Void Curse Thralls, Hungering Parasite, Rhymeworm's Bite, especially with knowing those ploys and their objectives can really mitigate some of those factors. I think, what are some of the decks like Beastbound Assault, Tooth and Claw? Trying to think of some of the other ones, but
Toxic Terrors.
Terrors. I mean, if you can break upgrades, that's also pretty big, especially for like Toxic Terrors, Remlock Relics. But those are more niche, more in faction decks or Buccaneers. So on Buccaneers, I think one of the things we've listed some war bands here. Do we want to kind of speed run through war bands and call out some specific ones that are like either, I think it kind of counterplaying a war band breaks down to, do they have a big score in their faction objective deck? Do they have a specific ability that you can kind of counter, or a mechanic that you can counter?
Can I suggest that, like, since we're running we're running at a decent time right now, like maybe let's each pick a couple or something like that,
Sure.
and just say like, here's some tips on those, with the understanding that there's so many out there that it's a thing that we can return to.
58 war bands, but I was trying to break it down in the sense of like looking at and evaluating a war band as like, do they have a Corn's Chosen, or do they have a specific ability? Right.
Don't usually have to worry about countering that
like,
one.
Work on countering Corn's Chosen.
I'm just throwing it out there. Like, that is one where it's like, hang on, they might actually have that, or like Absolute Desecration in Kagra's situation. It's a 4 glory score for having 4 objectives desecrated. I was just trying to think about some ways of evaluating a warband quickly. Just like, do they have one of those big pocket glory cards, or do they have a mechanic that can really, like, for instance, Headsman's Curse? If you take out Terminus, you take out a lot of their resurrection ability.
Sure, yeah.
Then they only have 1 ploy to resurrect, and they can't bring back the wielder of the blade.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's a good point. I'm gonna let Phil ponder on it for a second while I kind of throw some. I think Headsman's is a good example. I think I was watching a game recently, and they have I want to say it's All Rise, where it's if they have killed somebody and have a raise counter, or have 2 raise counters. And I think that's so automatic for them most of the time that this game I was watching, the person started scoring it and their opponent had to be like, actually, you didn't score it. I don't have anybody dead. They're like, what? And I've only killed one of yours. Like, it's been that much of a standoff game. And so they're corner cases, but you can watch as they come up. So where you look for those are, what are their, big haymaker scores, or what are their like big regular scores? I think a good example for me is against Hexbane. If I'm playing them, a lot of times I'm trying to limit the number of attacks they get early. I know they benefit so much from getting killed early that I'm fine. If I can score without as much engagement, great. And then one of the last things I will do is dive somebody into another territory so that they can't get proof of guilt in the first round, because I happen to like put everybody as far back as I could.
Yeah.
So avoid that, that sort of thing. Phil, you got an example?
Sure. Yeah. So Storm Coven, I think, is another warband where they're pretty aggressive, and they don't have a lot of really passive scoring, and so you're probably going to want to try and keep them at arm's length for a little while. Also know that Storm Coven really do care about having at least one objective they can get onto in enemy territory. They have a number of pretty strong scores that require them to be on an objective in enemy territory. So you'll, I think, often see somebody place one objective like just across the line. And if you see the Storm Coven player do that, just kind of know that like you maybe need to have a game plan for how to get them off that, or to stop them from getting on it in the first place. And And
At least
then
making it more difficult by placing yours. If you can place yours first in no one's territory and just increase the distance they have to travel into your territory
yeah,
round one.
yeah, that can certainly help. And then if you have any tech for denying pings or spell casting, Hexbanes have one, Seraphon have one. Just having these power cards that can sort of turn off some of their power cards can actually be pretty helpful, because they have a number of things that care about, like, hey, did you cast a spell to do a thing? Either for scoring or for like turning on, like they have an upgrade that's like, if this fighter's cast a spell this turn, their attacks get grievous. And it's like, well, if you can stop them from casting a spell, which is easier said than done, but like if you can do it, it can be pretty painful. Certainly a thing to watch out for.
I've got some quick call outs for like some easy. This is pretty widely known, but for newer listeners, if they don't already, there's a couple warbands with key mechanics or fighters that are key to a mechanic. So, for instance, Thundrix Profiteers and Headcrackas, both of the leaders are the Inspire mechanic for the warband. I think also,
Morgwaith.
is it Morgwaith?
Yeah.
Take the leader out. They can't inspire their fighters anymore. There might
Until
be a ploy
round
or
3.
two,
Yeah.
but that can really cripple them getting the inspire and being more effective with their stats. Also, Sepulchral Guard and Exiled Dead, both of their leaders have big movement mechanics attached to them, specific actions. So whether you void curse them so that they can't do those actions anymore, or you kill the leader so that they can't do their specific actions, that can really limit their mobility and their efficiency.
Yeah, their resurrection is tied to their leaders as well. So if you can kill their leader, they don't get to bring their fighters back anymore. Which is pretty big.
Also Zandara.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot there for trying to counter Zandara, but it's very different.
Challenging.
It's a different one.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, I think another one that is sometimes pretty intimidating if you don't have the reps is how to counterplay against razors. So they have that the hammer tide, which is just like a laser beam of 1 damage and a stagger, just anybody in a straight line. So
It's the first enemy fighter in the line.
Yeah, but so you can usually see like, oh, they're going to try and deploy the leader here because it has like the most firing lanes. And so then you can try and be like, I'll put my least important fighters in those lanes. And then if I do have to deploy anybody in those lanes, I'm going to move them or push them out of those lanes, because at least in my games against Paven, he was pretty happy to just sit back and take one action to deal a damage and then one action to deal it. And like, until he was pressed to do something else, that's all he wanted to do. So just knowing that like, that's a thing. And then the squid, if you attack Sephinir, after the attack, he gets to teleport away into the center part of the board and stagger a fighter that was within 3 hexes of him when he teleports. And if you are trying to like keep your opponent's positioning contained in some way, or like you need Sephinir to be in a certain spot because like, hey, I need to, have an extra charge this round, and you kind of don't think about the fact that he could be on the other side of the board after your first attack, you can really get yourself out of position. So sometimes you just have to ignore the squid for a little while if you can't kill him in one hit.
Yeah, it's just one more thing to think about, but they have a surge, I believe, for having staggered enemy fighters. So maybe
it's a 2 glory surge for having 3 enemy fighters staggered, or 3 enemy fighters out of action or staggered or something like that. So
attacking Sephinir while you have somebody in no man's land that could get staggered might not be a good route.
Yeah, especially if it's like going to get them over that hump. You know?
Yeah.
So
keep track of how many, and then make sure to be careful.
Any other warbands that we want to call out specifically as have a juicy counterplay to? Skittershanks,
I mean,
Clawpack have what's the keyword? The
assassins versus not minions.
no,
Yeah.
sorry, I saw Skittershank and I was thinking Plague Pack.
Oh,
Befouler,
yeah.
sorry,
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Befoulers for the plague rats. Recognizing where they're going to be corrupting in territories, they need 2 Befoulers in one territory or 1 Befouler on an objective in that territory in order to corrupt it. Being able to stymie that is massive. I felt that pain a lot.
I mean, I think another warband you'll see plenty is Gore Chosen. And I think a couple tips I have there is if you happen to be in a situation where you don't have to charge, then don't. My matchup against Seraphon, the Starblood Stalkers at LVO was a great example of this, where she was not willing to charge once she realized she was absolutely counterplaying me. And so I've Glorious Battle, which just needs 4 people to have Blood Tithe charges, but that means I need an enemy to charge, and I was not getting it. So that was a 2 glory end phase that I thought was going to be really easy, and then it just bricked out of my hand. And the other one there is like concentrating damage, which is good advice in general, but here Grim Satisfaction will score if 4 different fighters have like wounds on them. And if you kind of splash damage around the Gore Chosen, then they can just do a little bit back, and then they'll score a 3 glory end phase.
Yeah.
So it's especially important in that situation.
Yeah, and they get Blood Tithe when you hit them. So, like, if you splash the damage around, you're giving resources to the whole warband instead of just one fighter at a time. And so you really don't want to be doing that if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's kind of unavoidable, but I think in a lot of cases, most warbands can be pretty selective to say, like, I'm going to focus this one fighter down.
I think one last counter deck play that I want to recommend, and it's saved for last, I think, because we always forget it, is Force of Frost and Plunder. If you can plunder and put out ice blocks, or more importantly, cover hexes, you can shut down their casting of certain spells in the Force of Frost deck. You can also prevent Ice Age if they're running that, and you put one of those available cover hexes down, or available feature tokens down as a cover hex. Ice Age is screwed, and you're limiting their ability to cast the in-faction spells for Force of Frost. Plunder. Why do I always forget you?
That's such a good question.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's
I think it's
super
so
useful.
many years of playing this game without having that option. Like, it's really hard to, like, those
I
are
understand
like
for you guys, but
and then also just knowing that, like, it's a reaction, so it's super useful sometimes. But and it's also just a strong counterplay into any ranged enemy warband. You can drop a block hex and save yourself some firing lanes for a little while. So
that's true. All right. Any last thoughts people want to cover?
No, I mean, I honestly, like, this is, I think we all agree, like, this is a topic that can be revisited many, many times. And I think we just tried to hit, like, the biggest things that we're seeing, and just some of the thoughts, and, like, just, the theory, or the thought process behind making this sort of thing happen is hopefully get your mind clicking in that direction.
Yeah. And that actually just reminded me of something I was thinking about before we started talking about the warbands, is that if you are trying to work on this sort of stuff and you're like, man, I really wish I was better at counterplay, I think one of the best things that you can do is, if you have like a practice partner who's got a lot of time and doesn't mind like sharing strategy with you, because some people will be like, well, I don't really want to give away all my secrets because I'm trying to win the next local tournament or whatever. But if you've got a friend who doesn't mind talking this stuff through with you, either during a game or post game, you can say, like, okay, so I was thinking about this situation, this thing that happened in the game. This is what I did thinking about this. As the person who is on the receiving end of it, did you feel that? Did you think about it in a different way? Like, what would have been worse in your opinion to be the better counterplay? And like, that's, I think, how you can start to learn some of these things is like, once you get that feedback from your opponent to be like, man, that thing that you did really messed me up. You're like, okay, I'm on the right track then.
Something I've done with new players is when we're playing, and usually I'm like playing with an open hand or whatever, they'll say, okay, for this activation, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'll say, certainly could. Everything you said is within bounds. Here's what I fear, and show them the move that or maybe it's a different take or a different positioning on the charge that they were going to make. But and I reveal to them how it counters what I intend to do on my turn, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that gets back to Davy's early point, though, of like, depending on where the player's at in their journey of learning how to play Underworlds, they may not be ready for that.
It may
not even help to know that information.
Sure.
So just something to keep in mind.
Giving an example of how two people can play the game, and with this in mind, with counterplay in mind, you could look at it this way and approach a game that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I'll take us out of here. I learned a lot. So if you'd like to hear more from us or you want to reach out to us, you can reach us at whatthehexcast on X or at whatthehexcast@gmail.com. Best place to find us is on our Discord. Links on to our Discord at themortalrealms.com. Or you reach out to our Gmail. Coming up, new release when, Davey? Tell us.
If I knew, I would be real excited.
Let me look into the crystal ball here.
I tried. The silver lining on this is that I thought I was going to have, like, Emmett settled on he wanted to have Thundrix Profiteers and Fearsome Fortress was the best pairing. And I was like, that's great. You're going to definitely have to learn a new pairing before Nova. And at this point, I'm like, I guess not. I guess that's going to be fine. So
yeah, right.
It'll work.
Here we go.
Yeah, we're within the release window for our tournament, obviously, as you're hearing it. But Nova's just 2 weeks away. So we are fast approaching. If you're hearing this and we still haven't gotten a release, it's probably not going to be any different than when we go to Nova.
I mean, I can't see getting a notification and it releasing before Nova, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We'll find out.
I have to imagine Nova's got some sort of cutoff as well to be like nothing new before, X date. And that's probably at least a week. So we're basically looking at, as of recording this, we would have like a 5-day window where something new could come out and actually shake things up. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, I thought we would have gotten a bigger, more bombastic sort of a release for New Blood Angels, but they're just slow rolling it out on Warcom. And it's like, really expected more. I heard that they had a preview that they had to cancel at one of the recent cons or Gen Con, or maybe even the Tacoma Open, but they had to, I don't know, for whatever reason, they had to roll it. So instead we're getting everything kind of released in this way. Like they just dropped a teaser for 40K with some massive guns, and I'm just like, all right. I wouldn't be surprised if we just suddenly got like, here's the new Underworld stuff, here you go, pop.
It's certainly happened before, but hopefully not.
I don't know. I'm not going to Nova, so I welcome it. Throw some chaos. G shows up with the brand new warband. All right. So coming up, new release when, or maybe we'll cover what happened at Nova or at our Q3 tournament, which is happening at the time of you guys listening to this, hopefully. And so, Davey, hit us with that flavor text.
Yeah, always. Gentlemen, these kind of non-warband specific episodes are always going to be challenging. This may be the most challenging that I've ever thrown at you. This is a universal card. It is currently valid in the Nemesis pool. I am going to give you a quote. If either of you get this, I'm going to count it triple. for the scorekeeping that we are definitely doing, for sure doing.
Oh yeah,
Listeners, help us out.
This one is attributed to Gwyn Ironsoul. She's not. I'm going to give you the image as well. She's not pictured on this card. Brodus is. Brodus is totally smushing. I want to say it's one of the petitioners, maybe even the petitioner who's like climbing out of the ground. It's hard to say. There's like this. But the quote from Gwyn Ironsoul is, "This is for your own good."
Oh, man.
This is an objective. And it is an objective
I know.
that is... Oh, you think you know?
Maybe.
All right.
I have to find the name of the...
I'll tell you, it's a surge.
Prevention over cure?
Whoa! Triple points for Phil.
Says the guy who's played this deck more than anybody else on the cast.
I forgot. Wow. I forgot that piece. I was like, well, nobody
would know that card.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's too deep a cut. But it is not
very appropriate
to be able to get the paths of prophecy here. But yeah, I do also have a recommended listing for you, and this one is it's All the Answers, which is hopefully what you have when you're doing Counterplay, and that's by Social Distortion from I'm gonna forget the album, but it's from the 80s, one of those big throwbacks. Yeah.
Well, that's been all for us today. I've been your host, Brian.
I've been Phil.
And I've been Davy. Start recording.
The important thing?
Yep, the most important thing. Doesn't matter how smart we are. If we don't record it, it doesn't mean anything.
It might prove that we're not very smart actually at all.
Yeah. I am hearing crazy sounds from somebody. What's the
puncturing ice shards?
Puncturing ice shard.
What is it? Winter Age, where it's
Ice Age.
Ice Age. God, that was dumb. I thought